The great hall of the Zorveni Empire was a place of power. Tall, silver pillars reached toward the high ceiling, glowing with ancient energy. The banners of victorious battles hung proudly, displaying the strength of the Zorveni race. Today, however, the air was heavy with frustration. Princess Zyra stood at the center of the hall, her golden armor reflecting the light from the great chandeliers above. Her long, violet hair was tied back, revealing sharp, piercing eyes that held no kindness. Before her, yet another noble suitor knelt, a proud warrior from the Kreslin house, one of the oldest in the empire. He had traveled across the stars to claim her hand. "I offer my strength," the warrior declared, beating his fist against his chest. "I have conquered 12 planets, fought in the Emperor's name, and I will bring you victory if you choose me as your consort." Zyra raised an eyebrow. "And?" she asked, unimpressed. The warrior hesitated. "And I will protect you." Zyra scoffed. "Protect me." She stepped forward, her armored boots echoing in the silent hall. "You think I need protection? Tell me, warrior, have you ever fought against me?" The suitor swallowed hard. Everyone knew of Princess Zyra's reputation. She was not just the Emperor's daughter. She was a warrior who had defeated some of the strongest fighters in the Empire. "And no, Princess," the warrior admitted. "Then how can you claim to protect me?" Zyra smirked. She turned away, signaling to the court. "Next." The noble warrior's face turned red with embarrassment as he was led away. Murmurs filled the hall. This was the 5th suitor Zyra had rejected in a month. The nobles were growing restless. The emperor, seated on his grand throne at the far end of the hall, sighed deeply. "You cannot refuse forever, my daughter," Emperor Zarek said, his deep voice carrying across the room. His black and silver robes gave him an air of wisdom and authority. "The empire needs alliances. A strong leader must stand beside you." Zyra folded her arms, "Then let them send someone worthy." The emperor frowned, but before he could speak, a guard stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the next representative has arrived," he announced. "Another noble," Zyra muttered. "Let's get this over with." The doors of the great hall opened with a deep, echoing sound. The court turned to see who would enter next. But as the figure stepped forward, whispers spread like wildfire. It was not a Zorveni noble. The man who entered was tall, but not like the massive, armored warriors of the Empire. His build was strong but lean, his posture relaxed but confident. He wore a dark blue uniform with golden stripes on the shoulders, marking him as a captain. His face was smooth, his eyes sharp with intelligence, and most surprisingly of all, he was human. Zyra's eyes narrowed. "What is a human doing here?" The man walked forward without hesitation, stopping a respectful distance from the throne. He placed his hand over his chest and gave a small bow, not too deep, not too low, just enough to show respect without looking weak. "Captain Elias Voss, representing the United Earth Federation." He introduced himself. His voice was steady, his expression unreadable. A silence filled the hall. Zyra studied him carefully. Humans were new to the galactic stage. They did not have great fleets like the Zorvani, nor ancient empires like the Rulax Dominion. Yet, somehow, in only a few decades, they had spread across the stars, proving themselves to be resourceful, adaptable, and unpredictable. The Emperor leaned forward. "A human. I was not informed of this." Elias smiled slightly. "Apologies, Your Majesty. Earth does not have noble houses, but we do have leaders. And we believe that alliances should not be built only on bloodlines, but on shared goals." Zyra scoffed. "Is that so? Then tell me, Captain, what makes you think you have a place here? Do you believe yourself to be my equal?" Elias turned his gaze to her. His blue eyes did not waver. "No," he admitted. "I don't think anyone is your equal, Princess." The court gasped. Some took it as an insult. Others saw it as flattery. But Zyra was taken aback for a different reason. He did not look afraid. Every suitor before him had tried to impress her with their strength, their victories, their conquests. But this human, he stood there, completely unaffected by the weight of the empire pressing down on him. He did not try to challenge her strength. He did not try to dominate the room. Instead, he simply acknowledged her as she was, with neither fear nor arrogance. Interesting. Zyra stepped closer, studying him. You speak well, human, but words are easy. Elias tilted his head. That's true. Zyra narrowed her eyes. You don't seem nervous. Elias chuckled. Should I be? That was unexpected. No one laughed in the presence of the Zorvani royal court. Yet this human had just done so, without hesitation. For the first time in a long time, Zyra felt something she had not felt with any of her previous suitors. Curiosity. The Emperor watched the exchange with interest. Very well, he said. Captain Voss, since you wish to stand here as a representative of your people, I will allow it for now. But if you wish to remain, you must prove that humans are worthy of our respect. Elias nodded. That seems fair. Zyra smirked. Then let's see how long you last, human. The challenge had been made, and for the first time in her life, Princess Zyra was not entirely sure what would happen next. The royal training arena was a vast circular ground made of black stone, surrounded by towering statues of past Zorvani warriors. The air was thick with tension as Princess Zyra stood in the center, her arms crossed, eyes locked onto the human who had dared to enter her world. Elias Voss stood before her, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharp. He had changed into a simple combat uniform, black with silver stripes, given to him by the Zorvani attendants. Unlike the heavy armor of the other warriors, his attire was light, allowing for speed and flexibility. The court had gathered in the stands above, eager to see how long the human would last. Many whispered that it would be over in seconds. Do you truly believe you can fight me, Captain Voss? Zyra asked, tilting her head. Elias smiled. I believe I can try. Zyra smirked. Interesting answer. She had faced many challengers before, but none had ever looked so calm in front of her. Humans were strange creatures. The Emperor raised his hand. This is not a battle to the death. This is a test, he declared. Captain Voss, if you can prove yourself in combat, you will earn the right to remain in our court. Elias gave a respectful nod. Understood. Zyra stepped forward, her movements smooth and controlled. Let's make this fair, then, she said, drawing two short Zorvani training blades from her belt. The silver weapons gleamed under the arena lights. She tossed one toward Elias. He caught it mid-air, testing the weight in his hand. It was heavier than he expected, but he didn't let that show. Are you sure you want to use this? Kyra asked, twirling her blade effortlessly. I thought humans preferred guns and machines. Elias smirked. That's the funny thing about humans, Princess. We adapt. A gong echoed through the arena, signaling the start of the duel. Zyra moved first. She was fast, blindingly fast. In an instant, she was in front of him, her blade slicing through the air. Elias barely dodged, twisting to the side as the blade passed inches from his shoulder. He countered quickly, striking toward her side, but Zyra blocked with ease, her strength sending a shock through his arm. The court cheered as Zyra pressed forward, launching a series of rapid attacks. Elias knew he couldn't overpower her. Zorvani were naturally stronger than humans, but strength isn't everything. He changed his strategy. Instead of meeting her strikes head-on, he dodged, sidestepped, and redirected her momentum. He used footwork, angles, and timing, things that many Zorvani warriors, who relied on brute force, often underestimated. Zyra's eyes narrowed as Elias ducked under another swing and spun away. He's reading my movements. She lunged, faster this time, expecting him to move left. But Elias surprised her. He didn't move at all. Instead, he stepped forward, catching her off guard. She barely managed to block as he turned her attack against her, forcing her back. The court fell silent. Elias grinned. Not what you expected. Zaira clenched her jaw. No suitor had ever lasted this long against her. But she wasn't done. She increased her speed, pushing Elias harder. She tested him with feints, unpredictable strikes, and sudden shifts in tempo. Most warriors would crumble under the pressure. But Elias held his ground. He wasn't just fighting, he was thinking, adapting. Every time she changed her attack pattern, he adjusted. He didn't rely on brute strength, but on skill, on strategy. And that made him dangerous. Zaira's heart pounded, not from exhaustion, but from excitement. She had never faced an opponent like him before. The duel continued, both warriors locked in a perfect balance of offense and defense. Then, suddenly, Elias feinted left. Zaira moved to intercept, but at the last moment, he stopped. Her body reacted too fast. She had already committed to the counter. Realizing her mistake, she tried to correct her movement, but it was too late. Elias had outmaneuvered her. He spun behind her, bringing his blade up to her shoulder in a mock strike. If this were a real battle, she would have lost. Silence. Then, a loud clang as Skyred knocked his blade away and stepped back, breathing hard. The court erupted into gasps and whispers. The princess, the undefeated warrior, had been caught off guard. Elias lowered his blade. "Do I pass?" he asked with a smirk. Zaira stared at him, her chest rising and falling. Then, to everyone's shock, she laughed. It was not a soft laugh, nor a mocking one. It was a genuine, surprised laugh. "You're better than I thought, human," she admitted. "But don't get arrogant. Next time, I won't hold back." Elias chuckled. "I wouldn't want it any other way." The emperor, who had been watching silently, stood from his throne. His sharp gaze studied Elias, then moved to Zaira. He had seen something change in his daughter, something he had never seen before. He raised his hand. "Captain Voss has proven himself. He will remain in our court as an honored guest." The court murmured, some in approval, others in disbelief. Zaira smirked at Elias. "Looks like you're staying, Captain." Elias shrugged. "Looks like it." But both of them knew this was just the beginning. The royal palace of the Zorveni Empire was alive with whispers. News of the duel between Princess Zaira and the human, Captain Elias Voss, had spread like wildfire. Many had expected the fight to end in seconds, but instead, Elias had held his ground. He had not won, but he had done something even more shocking. He had surprised the princess. Now the court was divided. Some nobles saw Elias as a worthy challenger, someone who had proven that humans were not as weak as they once thought. Others, however, saw him as a threat, a dangerous outsider who had no place among the great warriors of the Zorvani. Deep within the palace, a private meeting was taking place. A group of high-ranking nobles sat in a darkened chamber, their faces lit only by the glowing blue flames of the ceremonial torches. "This is unacceptable," Lord Varrock, a powerful noble, growled. His reptilian eyes gleamed with anger. "A human standing beside our princess. It is an insult to our traditions." "He should have been defeated," another noble muttered. Yet somehow he held his own. "We underestimated him." Lord Varrock slammed his fist against the stone table. "It does not matter. The Emperor is allowing this human to stay, but that does not mean we must accept him. The princess must choose a Zorveni warrior as her consort. We cannot let an outsider threaten our future." A shadowed figure leaned forward. "Then perhaps we should remove this problem before it becomes greater." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, nods of agreement followed. Meanwhile, unaware of the storm brewing around him, Elias walked through the palace corridors, his hands resting behind his back as he observed his surroundings. He could feel the weight of the gazes upon him. Some were curious, others hostile. "This is what happens when you impress people who don't want to be impressed," Elias muttered to himself. You should get used to it, Captain. Elias turned to see Xyra standing behind him, arms crossed, an amused look on her face. She had changed from her battle armor into a royal robe of deep red, embroidered with golden patterns of ancient Zorveni history. Even without her armor, she still carried the aura of a warrior. You've caused quite a stir, she continued, stepping beside him. Some of the nobles think you're dangerous. Elias smirked. That's funny. I haven't even done anything yet. Xyra tilted her head, studying him. That's exactly why they fear you. They walked side by side through the palace gardens, where bioluminescent flowers glowed softly in the evening air. The atmosphere was peaceful, but Xyra's mind was not. For years, she had rejected every suitor who had come before her. They had been strong, skilled, and proud, but also predictable. But Elias was different. He didn't try to impress her with grand words or boast about his victories. He didn't try to prove he was better. Instead, he simply was himself, and that was what made him unpredictable. She had to admit it was intriguing. You're not what I expected, she finally said. Elias glanced at her, good or bad. Xyra smirked. I haven't decided yet. Before Elias could respond, the Zorveni royal guard approached them. Princess Xyra, Captain Voss, the Emperor has summoned you both to the Grand Hall. Xyra raised an eyebrow. Now, yes, Princess, it is urgent. Elias exchanged a glance with Xyra. Something was happening. They arrived at the Grand Hall to find the Emperor seated upon his throne, his expression unreadable. The court was gathered, whispering among themselves. At the center of the hall stood Lord Veruk, his chest puffed out with confidence. Princess Xyra, Emperor Zarek spoke, his voice firm. Lord Veruk has come with a formal challenge. Xyra narrowed her eyes. Challenge. Lord Veruk stepped forward. Your Highness, this human has no place here. He is an outsider, unworthy of standing in the royal court. If he wishes to remain, he must prove himself again. Elias sighed. Didn't I just do that? Veruk smirked. That was a mere duel, a simple test. But a true warrior must survive more than a duel. He must survive the hunt. Gasps filled the hall. Even Xyra's eyes widened slightly. The hunt? Elias asked, crossing his arms. That sounds ominous. The Emperor watched carefully. It is an ancient Zorveni tradition, a test of survival. You will be taken to the wild lands outside the city, where you must last until sunrise. But beware, the beasts of the hunt are not ordinary creatures. They are strong, fast, and bred for battle. Elias frowned. Let me guess. If I fail, I don't just lose the challenge. I don't survive at all. Veruk smiled coldly. Exactly. Xyra clenched her fists. Father, this is unnecessary. The captain has already proven himself. The Emperor's gaze remained firm. Perhaps, but let us see if he can survive as well. Elias exhaled slowly. He had expected resistance from the nobles, but this. Still, he wasn't one to back down. He turned to Xyra, who looked at him with a mix of frustration and concern. Well, Elias said, cracking his knuckles, I guess I better start running. Xyra shook her head. You're insane. Elias grinned. Or just human. As the court watched, the decision was made. By the next sunset, Elias would be sent into the deadly wildlands. If he survived the night, he would earn his place. If he failed, he would never return. And as Xyra looked at the human standing beside her, she found herself wondering, would he actually survive? For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure. The twin moons of Zorveth hung high in the night sky, casting a silver glow over the wild lands beyond the city. This was no ordinary forest. It was the Terris Noctis, the Nightlands, a vast, untamed wilderness where only the strongest creatures survived. And now, Elias Voss had to survive in it until sunrise. The Zorveni warriors had escorted him to the edge of the wildlands, where a massive metal gate stood between civilization and chaos. The court had gathered on high platforms, watching from a safe distance. Even Emperor Zarek had taken his place on the royal balcony, his expression unreadable. Princess Vzyra stood beside her father, arms crossed. She wasn't happy about this, but the rules of the challenge were clear. She couldn't interfere. Below, Ilias adjusted his gear, a basic survival knife and a small energy torch. No weapons, no armor, nothing else. That was the rule of the hunt. Lord Varrock stood at the side, smirking. Last chance, human. If you admit defeat now, I might consider allowing you to leave with your life. Elias gave him a lopsided grin. That's kind of you, but I think I'll take my chances. Varrock's smile faded. A deep horn echoed through the air. The gate began to rise with a loud mechanical groan. Beyond it, darkness stretched endlessly, the rustling of unseen creatures filling the air. Vzyra watched Elias closely. Be careful, she muttered under her breath. Elias took one last deep breath, then stepped into the wildlands. The gate slammed shut behind him. The hunt had begun. As soon as Elias moved deeper into the forest, he felt the shift in the atmosphere. The air was thick, carrying the scent of wet soil and something metallic, like blood. Strange glowing plants lit his path, but their eerie blue light only made the shadows seem darker. Stay calm. Observe. Adapt. That had been his rule since his days as a soldier. Panic killed faster than any enemy. A distant growl made him stop. He crouched low, pressing his hand against the ground. Heavy vibrations. Something big was moving. Then, silence. Elias narrowed his eyes. That was bad. Predators didn't stay quiet unless they were about to strike. A blur of motion. Elias threw himself to the side as something massive lunged from the shadows. He rolled across the dirt, coming up to one knee as he faced his attacker. It was a Drakkar, a monstrous reptilian beast with 6 legs, razor-sharp fangs, and eyes that burned like molten gold. It was nearly twice his size, its black scales blending perfectly into the darkness. Elias let out a slow breath. Well, you're uglier than I expected. The Drakkar snarled, muscles coiling as it prepared to strike again. Elias knew he couldn't fight it head-on. He was fast, but this thing was faster. Think, Elias. Use the terrain. His eyes flicked to a nearby tree with thick, twisting branches. A plan formed in his mind. The Drakkar charged. Elias ran toward the tree. Just as the beast leaped, he grabbed a low-hanging branch and swung himself upward. The Drakkar crashed into the trunk with a furious roar, its claws tearing into the bark. But Elias wasn't done. He climbed higher, then reached into his boot, pulling out his survival knife. He had to time this perfectly. The Drakkar recovered and leaped again, jaws snapping. Elias jumped. He twisted in midair, landing on the creature's back. Before it could react, he drove the knife deep into the soft spot between its armored plates. The Drakkar howled in pain, thrashing wildly, but Elias held on. He twisted the blade deeper, cutting through vital nerves. Seconds later, the beast collapsed with a final, shuddering breath. Silence returned to the forest. Elias stood, breathing heavily. His hands were covered in black blood, his heart pounding. Then he smirked. One down. Back at the palace, the court watched the hunt through floating holoscreens that displayed various parts of the wildlands. Many had expected Elias to be dead within minutes. Instead, they watched as he killed a Drakkar with nothing but a knife. Murmurs filled the hall. Even Emperor Zarek raised an eyebrow. Zira couldn't hide her surprise. She had known Elias was skilled, but this, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. Lord Varrock's face darkened. This changes nothing, he muttered. The night is long, and the wildlands are unforgiving. He will not last until sunrise. Zyra wasn't so sure anymore. As Elias continued deeper into the wildlands, he remained alert. The Drakkar wasn't the only danger here. There were worse things lurking in the darkness. And he was right. A strange clicking sound echoed through the trees. It was rhythmic, unnatural. Elias tensed. He had heard something like this before. Communication signals. But not from humans. He turned slowly, his muscles tight. From the shadows, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared. Then another. And another. Stepping into the dim light was a creature unlike anything Elias had faced before. Humanoid in shape, but covered in dark, exoskeletal armor. Its arms ended in jagged, curved blades, and its elongated skull had no visible mouth, only those cold, intelligent red eyes. Elias exhaled. "Well," he muttered, gripping his knife tighter. "That's not good." The creatures watched him, unmoving. They were studying him, analyzing him. Then, as if coming to a decision, the largest one let out a high-pitched screech. The others responded instantly, their bodies blurring as they moved toward him. Fast. Elias didn't hesitate. He turned and ran. Because even the best warriors knew when to fight. And when to survive. Elias sprinted through the dense forest, his boots kicking up dirt and leaves as he dodged between towering alien trees. The creatures behind him, sleek, deadly, and impossibly fast, moved with terrifying precision. Their glowing red eyes cut through the darkness, closing the distance with each passing second. This is bad. The Drakkar had been a challenge, but at least it had been an animal. These things, they were something else. Their movement patterns, their formation, it was tactical, intelligent. They weren't just hunting him for food. They were testing him. Elias vaulted over a fallen log, rolling to his feet. He needed to think fast. He had no weapons except his knife, and there was no way he could take them head-on. Use the terrain. Set a trap. His eyes scanned the area as he ran. The trees here had long, thick vines hanging from their branches. The ground was uneven, with jagged rock formations jutting from the soil. Then he saw it, a narrow gorge just ahead. If he could lure them in and use the terrain against them, he might have a chance. He changed direction slightly, making sure they followed. The clicking noises behind him grew louder. Almost there. At the last second, Elias grabbed a vine and swung himself across the gorge. As he landed on the other side, he spun around, just in time to see the first creature leap after him. Elias reacted instantly. He reached out and slashed at the vine with his knife. The vine snapped. The creature, mid-air, had no way to adjust. It let out a shrill screech as it plunged into the darkness below. One down. But the others had learned. The second creature stopped short of the gorge, tilting its head as it observed what had happened. Then, instead of jumping, it began climbing along the rock wall to cross. Elias cursed under his breath. Fast learners. Great. He turned and ran again. Back at the palace, the court was in an uproar. He took down one of the Exaltheri. A noble gasped, watching the holographic display. The what? A human diplomat leaned in, confused. Xyra's expression was grim. The Exaltheri, a species of alien predators that only appeared during the hunt. They are not native to this world. The diplomat frowned. You mean, they were placed there? Xyra nodded. They are prisoners, exiled war criminals from the galactic wars. Instead of execution, they are released into the wild lands to hunt anyone foolish enough to enter. The diplomat paled. And you sent him in there with nothing but a knife. Xyra clenched her fists. I didn't. Varrock did. She turned toward her father, eyes blazing. This is not a test of survival. This is a death sentence. Emperor Zarek remained silent, watching the screen with interest. But Xyra saw something in his gaze, something no one else seemed to notice. Was it curiosity? Or was it something else? Elias ducked behind a large boulder, pressing his back against the cold stone. His breath was steady despite the adrenaline rushing through his veins. The remaining Xeltheri were still searching for him. He could hear them moving, their sharp claws clicking against the ground. They were smart. They wouldn't fall for the same trick twice. Elias needed another plan. Slowly, he reached into his boot and pulled out the small energy torch. It wasn't a weapon, but it was light, and light could be a distraction. He took a deep breath, then threw the torch toward the trees. As it hit the ground, it activated, sending out a bright, flickering glow. Instantly, the Xeltheri snapped their heads toward it, their instincts reacting to movement and brightness. Elias didn't waste the opportunity. He moved, fast and silent. He climbed a tree, his fingers gripping the rough bark as he pulled himself up. The creatures were still focused on the torch, trying to analyze what it was. Then Elias struck. He leaped from the tree, landing on top of one of the Xeltheri. Before it could react, he drove his knife into the base of its neck, severing its spinal cord. The creature collapsed instantly. The last Xeltheri turned, letting out an enraged screech. Elias met its gaze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, the Xeltheri did something unexpected. It backed away. Elias frowned. Why wasn't it attacking? The creature let out a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl of acknowledgement. Then, without another word, it turned and disappeared into the forest. Elias exhaled. Did it? Respect me. He shook his head. No time to think about that. He had survived, and sunrise was only a few hours away. He just had to keep going. The court was silent as they watched Elias take down the second Xeltheri. Even Varrock looked shocked. Emperor Zarek finally stood. The human has survived longer than any outsider before him. Murmurs spread through the hall. Varrock, unwilling to admit defeat, stepped forward. He still has time to fail. The wild lands are merciless. Syra's voice was sharp, and yet he endures. The Emperor gave her a thoughtful look. Then he turned to the guards. Prepare the final test. Zyra stiffened. Final test. The Emperor's gaze was unreadable. If the human is to prove himself worthy, he must do more than survive. He must conquer. The meaning was clear. Elias Voss had one more challenge left. And this time, survival would not be enough. He would have to win. The first light of dawn touched the horizon, casting a faint glow over the wildlands. Elias Voss stood on a rocky ledge, breathing heavily. His body ached, covered in bruises and scratches, but he was still alive. He had fought beasts, escaped deadly traps, and even faced the Xeltheri. He had done more than just survive. He had conquered the night. But it wasn't over. High above, the palace court watched in silence. Emperor Zarek sat on his throne, his expression unreadable. Thyra stood beside him, her fingers digging into the railing. She had thought this would be enough, that Elias had proven himself. She was wrong. The human has survived, Lord Varrock said, his tone neutral but his eyes burning with resentment. But survival alone is not enough to win the hunt. Zara turned toward her father. You said it yourself. No outsider has lasted this long. What more does he need to prove? The Emperor remained still. Then he spoke. He must claim victory. Zyra's stomach tightened. What does that mean? Varrock smirked. He must defeat the apex. A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. Even Xyra's breath caught. The apex, the ultimate predator of the wildlands, a creature so deadly that even the strongest Zorveni warriors feared it. It was not just an animal, it was a force of nature. Zyra's heart pounded. Elias has no weapons, no armor. He's already exhausted. And now, she clenched her fists. This is madness. But Emperor Zarek simply raised his hand. And the final test began. Elias didn't need an announcement to know something was wrong. The ground shook. A deep, rumbling growl echoed through the valley, making the air vibrate. Birds scattered from the treetops. Smaller creatures fled in every direction. Elias exhaled. Of course. Why not throw a final boss at me? Then, from the shadows, it appeared. The apex. It was enormous, easily 3 times his height, covered in thick, black armor like scales. 4 glowing eyes burned like fire, and its mouth, filled with rows of jagged teeth, curled into something almost like a grin. Massive claws, sharp enough to tear through stone, dug into the earth as it stalked toward him. Elias had fought many things before, but this was different. His grip tightened around his knife. Think, Elias. There's always a way. The apex moved fast, faster than anything its size should be able to. It lunged at him with terrifying speed. Elias barely dodged in time, rolling across the dirt as the creature's claws slammed into the ground, leaving deep cracks in the rock. He scrambled to his feet. He couldn't fight this thing head-on. He had to be smarter. Up in the palace, the crowd held their breath. "He has no chance," a noble whispered. Lord Varrock smirked. "It seems the human's luck has finally run out." Zyra didn't respond. She refused to believe that. She had seen Elias do the impossible, and she knew he wasn't done yet. Elias ran toward a jagged rock formation, using the uneven ground to stay ahead of the apex. The beast chased him, smashing through obstacles like they were nothing. He had to find a weakness. His eyes darted over its body. The armored plates were too thick to pierce with his knife. But the eyes? Maybe. But how could he get close enough? As he ran, an idea formed in his mind. A crazy, reckless, stupid idea. And that meant it might just work. He turned sharply, running straight toward a large dead tree with hanging vines. The apex followed, gaining speed. "Come on, just a little closer." At the last second, Elias grabbed a vine and swung himself high into the air. The apex, unable to stop its momentum, crashed headfirst into the massive tree. The impact shook the ground. The tree groaned. Then, with a loud crack, it began to fall, right onto the apex. The beast roared as the heavy trunk crashed down, pinning it against the rocks. Elias landed on its back. His heart pounded as he climbed toward its head. The apex thrashed, trying to free itself, but the weight of the tree held it down just long enough. Elias didn't hesitate. With all his strength, he drove his knife straight into its glowing eye. The apex let out a deafening shriek, its body convulsing. Its claws scraped at the ground. Then, silence. The mighty apex lay still. Elias exhaled, his body shaking. He had done it. He had won. The palace court was in shock. The nobles, the warriors, even Lord Varrock stared at the screen in disbelief. The apex, someone whispered. He killed it. Then, slowly, the silence broke. A cheer erupted from the crowd. Zorveni warriors, trained to respect only strength, pounded their fists against their chests in salute. Even those who had doubted Elias now looked at him with newfound admiration. Zyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A smile tugged at her lips. "He did it," she whispered. Lord Varrock scowled. "This proves nothing. He is still just a—" "Enough," Emperor Zarek said, his voice firm. Varrock fell silent. The Emperor stood. "The human has done what no outsider has ever done before," he declared. "He has not only survived but claimed victory." He turned to Zyra, his piercing gaze meeting hers. "Daughter, you have chosen well." Zyra's heart skipped a beat. "You mean?" Zarek nodded. "The human has earned his place among us." Zyra smiled, her eyes shining. Elias Voss had not just proven himself. He had changed everything. And the fate of the Empire would never be the same again. Elias Voss stood over the massive body of the apex, his breath steady despite the exhaustion in his limbs. The sun was rising now, casting golden light over the battlefield. Blood stained his hands, his clothes were torn, and every muscle in his body ached. But he had done it. He had survived. He had won. In the sky above, a loud hum echoed as a royal transport descended. The ship landed smoothly, and the doors slid open. A squad of Zorveni royal guards stepped out in their shining armor, their expressions unreadable. Then, Syra emerged. Her golden eyes locked onto Elias, scanning him from head to toe. Relief flickered across her face, but she quickly masked it with her usual calm. "You are still standing," she said, stepping closer. Elias smirked, wiping the blood from his face. "Takes more than a giant monster to put me down." Zara shook her head in disbelief. "You are truly insane." Elias chuckled. "You're not the first to say that." Behind her, the royal guards watched him with a mix of wariness and respect. Even Lord Varrock, who had been so sure of Elias's failure, now looked at him with grudging admiration. Then, another figure stepped forward. Emperor Zarek. The crowd fell silent as the mighty ruler of the Zorveni Empire approached the human. His gaze, cold and calculating, swept over Elias as if weighing his worth one final time. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the Emperor spoke. "You have done what no other has ever done," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "You entered the wild lands as prey, and emerged as a hunter." Elias met his gaze without flinching. "I did what I had to do." Zarek studied him for a moment longer. Then he nodded. "You have earned the right to stand among us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The meaning was clear. Elias Voss, the human, was no longer an outsider. He was no longer a test subject, an intruder, or an amusing challenge. He was an equal. Back in the palace, the halls were filled with whispers. The court could not stop talking about the human who had conquered the hunt. Some nobles protested, calling it madness. Others, particularly the warriors, praised Elias's strength and courage. But one thing was certain: everything had changed. Elias stood in the throne room, dressed in fresh clothes. His wounds had been treated, and he now faced the Zorveni High Council. Lord Varrock, still bitter, stepped forward. "You may have survived the hunt, human, but do not think this makes you Zorveni." Elias crossed his arms. "I don't need to be Zorveni. I just need you to know that humans are not weak." Varrock narrowed his eyes but said nothing. Emperor Zarek raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "The laws are clear. The victor of the hunt may claim their reward." He turned to Elias. "You may ask for anything within my power to give." Elias glanced at Syra, who was watching him carefully. He could ask for wealth, a title, or even a place in the empire, but none of that mattered to him. "I don't want gold or power," Elias said. "I want a seat at the table." The court fell silent again. "A seat," Zarek repeated. Elias nodded. "Humans and Zorveni don't have to be enemies. Let us work together. Let us stand as allies, not just competitors." The nobles exchanged uncertain glances. No outsider had ever requested such a thing. The Zorveni were proud, strong, and rarely allied with anyone outside their own kind. But Elias had done what no one else had. Zarek considered his words carefully. Finally, he spoke. "So be it." A wave of shock passed through the court. The emperor had agreed. Zara smiled slightly. Elias had done it. He hadn't just survived. He had changed the future. Later, as the court dispersed, Syra found Elias standing on a balcony overlooking the city. "You could have asked for anything," she said, stepping beside him. "Why ask for something so difficult?" Elias smirked. "I never take the easy path." Zara shook her head. "You are strange, human." Elias chuckled. "You say that like it's a bad thing." She looked at him for a long moment, then finally let a small smile touch her lips. "No," she said softly, "not bad at all." And as the sun set over the empire, Elias Voss, the human who had conquered the hunt, knew that this was only the beginning. The future would be written differently now. Because one human had proven that strength was not just about power, it was about resilience, courage, and the willingness to challenge fate itself.